So here we are, not quite yet, but imagine we are now at January 20th, 2021, and the new president of the United States ends up being Bernie Sanders. I'm using Bernie Sanders as my example today because I was doing my research, and he's the only candidate in the race who absolutely supports carbon pricing without a doubt. So the reason why carbon pricing is the reason that I think is the most important is because it is the only most cost-effective way to equitably reduce carbon pollution, and it can be over twice as effective, according to economic studies, as subsidies. And so with subsidies, to get the same amount of carbon done, in other words, you have to spend twice as much money, which means you either have to raise taxes, take out loans, or cut spending for things like healthcare and education, all things we don't want. So I feel very strongly that any policy we do to fight global warming needs to be done as efficiently as possible. So there's a website, and I've shared on my Twitter several times, that looks, and I'll be in the doobly-doo down below, that talks about where do different candidates stand on global warming. Now, of the three major candidates left, we've got Kamala Harris of California, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, and Bernie Sanders of Vermont. It's the morning. And so Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris are definitely fixing climate change. There's no doubt about that. They're excellent senators, but they've never been clear about their stance on carbon taxes, which is, again, known by economists as the most cost-effective way of reducing as much global warming pollution as possible. So that makes me say, while they're identical on pretty much every other issue, more or less, with healthcare and education, things that people understand more for some reason, any one of them would be a fantastic president, way better than the person we have right now in office. But let's say Bernie Sanders gets elected, and a lot of people say he's such an amazing senator, because he is, and he's going to be so effective, and that's what I want to address today. So, let's say that we get a Democratic House, and we somehow pull a small majority in the Senate, and somehow we're able to end the filibuster rule, and so we're actually able to get something through the Senate, which is possible, even though it's going to be difficult. We'll have a vice president who's going to be along the same lines as Bernie Sanders, very consistent, you know what he stands for, and he has values that the vast majority of Americans agree on. Things that the vast majority of Americans like. I mean, that's the entire point. So let's imagine for a minute, looking at our history, there was a point in time where we had one of the most progressive senators in the United States was elected as president of the United States. On his platform were things such as he wanted to fight global warming. He was looking at cap and trade. He was looking at reforming our healthcare system. He wanted to make high-speed rail across the United States, and he wanted to make community college free for all Americans. And that's Barack Obama. Of course, of these four main proposals that I list, the only one that got through was the healthcare bill, and several major pieces of it were blocked by members of his own party, namely the public option. I was born with cerebral palsy, so I have a very strong feeling about making sure people with disabilities get full access to health care. And so for me, the very thought of making it so health insurance companies could discriminate against me without having a public option that the government runs, that would probably be lower cost. Look at Germany, for instance. And offer me better care, is kind of important for some reason. So it also kind of makes me a big fan of Obama. Not to say everything in his administration was perfect, but he was one of the best senators in America. How many other presidents in history have gone from being a state senator 4 years to being a U.S. senator, 4 years later becomes the president, and then does a complete overhaul of our healthcare system? That's happened one time. The only other president who's come close to that level of reform of any system was LBJ, and he had been in the Senate for decades before he became vice president under President Kennedy. And so it'd be hard to imagine, and President Obama was in favor of gay marriage way back in the 90s, Sanders was in favor of gay marriage way back in the 70s. Of course, Obama was in elementary school in the 70s, and middle school, so it's a little different. But point being, we've had a progressive president, and not everything under him was perfect. The other problem is that thanks to people saying, a lot of people saying, I can't vote for Hillary Clinton because of all the things that were going on wrong in the 2016 election. We're now, President Sanders is, or whoever, is not going to be able to just step right in with a universal health care proposal to either build on Obamacare or Medicare for all. The first thing the president is going to have to do, no matter who it is there's a lot of crap with Trump's policies that needs to be replaced. Military spending is out of control and it's unaudited, and that's a problem. And it's burning our resources and burning our planet because it's inefficient. All three candidates want to make that better. That's not an issue in the primary anymore. I'm not really going to focus on the others because they have basically no chance of winning. And secondly, we have the immigration crisis with the prisons on the border, which are violating the Geneva Protocols and the Bill of Rights. That needs to be dealt with immediately. As soon on January 20th of 2021, we need to have executive orders on doing a lot of damage Trump did. There could be a few laws that Trump managed to pass, mainly the tax reform. He didn't get much else through, which are going to be repealed through Congress, and that's going to take a lot of political capital and a lot of time. And it's going to be draining, and a lot of people are going to be advocating for, fair taxation, and that's going to suck. And it's happening because Clinton wasn't elected in 2016. And if we don't take care of that, we're not going to have the funding with our $1 trillion deficit, thanks to Donald Trump, that we will need to afford a lot of the programs we all want. Now, carbon tax will hopefully be part of this tax package, but it's going to happen either way. With or without Trump, this could have happened. And healthcare for all is going to be cheaper than what we're currently doing. So we don't really have to worry about the budget too much because of that, and because it's going to save Americans money overall. But we're going to have to make sure that instead of paying $8,000 to a private health insurance company, which denies you coverage reliably, we need to have we are going to need to raise taxes by about $4,000 to save you the $8,000 you're paying for your private health insurance in order to cover the cost of universal health care. So that's going to require tax reform. It's going to require to increase more revenue or take out more loans, which my generation is going to pay for when we're retired. And so that's going to be the reality, and a lot of people are going to be really disillusioned when they see, especially if President Sanders happens, because they're going to say, imagine that everything's going to be great when he's inaugurated on January 20th of 21. But then reality is going to hit, and it's going to hit hard, and it's going to hurt. If it's Elizabeth Warren, given all the things she's done for helping us in our economy, she's made our economy far more favorable than before she was a senator. I would support her as well. I just wish she would come out for carbon taxes in a clear statement on her website, and I will try to get that question to her when I go to a rally for her in a couple of days, and try to get her to make a stance, which needs to happen. Exemption free, of course, and I'll talk about that in another vlog. And I really hope that when we get a really progressive president, that we don't end up with people feeling totally disillusioned in the entire system. Because the real issue is that we don't have ranked voting, and we have corruption in our Congress, and that's going to prevent even the most progressive president from doing everything we want, and that's the reality of the real world. And we need to keep fighting, and in 2022, the primary, in the midterms, we're going to need to try to get better people into Congress. Hopefully by 2024, we'll have ranked voting on the ballot in a few more states. We have Maine already. Hopefully my home state of Washington and Massachusetts will be able to get it by then. That will get it into the national dialogue. And this is going to be really a lot better for our country. But basically that's my concern of what might happen if Senator Sanders does become president. We need to make sure people need to keep fighting, because, it just is, nothing happens overnight. I mean, looking at history, the abolition of slavery took hundreds of years of very hard work done by many people. and women's suffrage. I look back at my Quaker family history and I see Lucy Mott way back in the 1840s at Seneca Falls and saying, she's my cousin, saying these things, and she never saw the 19th Amendment. It was her prodigy, Susan B. Anthony, also a relative, who's a Quaker cousin of mine. It was her, and at the end of her life, getting the 19th Amendment. These things take time, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't fight for as much as we can. So it's my political ideology, given the work I've done for Carbon Washington, and given the work that I'm wanting to be doing for healthcare and for getting fair elections, is to fight for as much as we can, make it clear why my plan is the best, and then also, and then if we fail, keep pushing. Push for as much as we can and keep pushing the Overton window towards justice as much as we can, and we don't do that by getting people like Donald Trump into office. Because every time I have to talk to someone about issues such as prisons on the border being increasing in numbers and more people being incarcerated there, the more I'm not talking about global warming. And, that brings up another issue with the prisons on the border. This has been going on for 20 years almost, with when George W. Bush made it so that we ended the pathway to work visas for farm workers. That's when immigration really became an issue, was in the early 2000s. And then by the end of this issue, that was something divisive that he could use for his base. But beyond that, what we really need to see is that when we have things like that happen, it makes it harder to get the progress we really want to do done. The Patriot Act's barely even talked about anymore, even though it's unconstitutional. And this is because we have seen so much damage done by the Republican Party over the last few years, and by Democrats who in 2001 just folded over when they should have put up a fight and voted against the Patriot Act, which is one thing Bernie Sanders voted against, which is another reason why I love him and I think he's a great person. And we need to do as much as we can always, because the more we do now, the easier it's going to be in the future. And if we let our guard down, then we're going to have to do more work later, which prevents us from making a world which works for all, to quote my friend Sharif Abdullah. And that's the goal, is to make something that is just and compassionate. And we need to do as much as we can every day, even if it's not perfect, because better is what we're going to get. While pushing for perfect, we need to be able to say we'll get as much as we can and hold people accountable, and then when election day comes, hold them accountable for their actions. I don't know how else to do politics. That is how me and my crew have put carbon taxes onto the national dialogue. I voted for 1631 despite its many exemptions to oil refineries, the coal plant near Centralia, and many other heavily polluting industries. Why? Because I said, it's going to be a lot easier for us to eliminate these handouts to the worst polluters in the world than it will be to do a carbon tax from scratch in the next year. And so that's why I think we should always push for as much as we can, but also not infight when it's a policy that might not be exactly the way you want, because then if you haven't actually written out as a proposal, then there's nothing for me to compare against and decide which team I want to join. Because I'm also going to join the team that's working on a proposal that's written out before I join a team that says we're going to have a proposal in 2 years. Because these are issues, the sooner we better get it done, the more that's going to be able to be done later. And I wish that I wish I could snap my fingers and then all of a sudden make it so that healthcare would be cheap and affordable, accessible to all, period. But even still, you can have something like the Affordable Care Act, which is really good, and the public option was in the bill, which Congress removed under a Democratic Congress. So, that's why we need to push for as much as we can. That's why I think Sanders would be a fantastic president. That's why I realize that he's not going to get everything done on day one, or even during his term. He's not going to succeed in his goals. He has very lofty goals, which most of us agree with, us being Americans. And he's a good man. And at 15 minutes now, but that's the reality from my 8 years of lobbying. Have a great day.